Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Today, I'm joined by ESPN National Insider Jeremy Fowler, who does terrific work on TV and for ESPN Plus with his stories based off talks with league coaches and executives. We discuss a lot about the Washington football team, from his introduction to the Terry McLaurin fan club to the national perception of the organization. Which QB is the one to watch for Washington? Which free agent receiver did he project here in free agency? And more. You can follow Jeremy on Twitter at JFowler, that's JFOWLER, ESPN, and you can read my work on ESPN.com. I'll have another story later in the week about the pursuit of one position in particular this off-season. Before I share my conversation with Jeremy, here are a couple nuggets. I did ask him about Terry McLaurin because fans do get upset if people don't view him as one of the absolute best receivers. It's a hard spot to ascend to, especially only after 2 years, and McLaurin certainly is on his way up that ladder. I also think with more help around him, more high-profile games, he'll eventually get there. What he's done in 2 years without consistent quarterback play and without a quality, consistent threat on the outside around him is remarkable. I know there was a story the other day about Jeff Bezos being interested in buying Washington's franchise. No, I don't see that happening, nor did a few people I checked with yesterday. To get there, Dan Snyder would want to sell or be forced to sell. And for better or worse, I haven't heard anything that suggests we're at that point. If it gets there down the road, then certainly he's somebody you would expect would be interested because we've heard his name before. I think this was just something in connection to some suits that were filed that were uncovered by Front Office Sports. It's hard to imagine a guy like Bezos being content as a minority owner, which Washington needs to find. In the past, his name was linked to Seattle after the death of Paul Allen. So far, the Seahawks have not come on the market. If they ever did, that could be the team to watch for Bezos. The other interesting part was that it was about Bruce Allen and talking to John Moog, who's the guy leading the search to get some of these minority investors to be able to sell their shares. What I do know, and I've told you before, that Bruce Allen was very tight with the minority owners, Dwight Schrute in particular. So if there's a lot of connection there, yeah, you can probably figure out what's going on there. But there is a connection, so that's where we're at. Anyway, moving on. One thing I wanted to mention the other day in regards to quarterback Taylor Heinicke. In talking to some around the league about his deal, one person pointed this out, that Washington could have signed him to a 2-year contract when it promoted him from the practice squad, as some apparently there suggest they should do. They would have had him at a cost of the minimum $610,000. It's what they did with Steven Montez when they took him off the practice squad. Now his new deal doesn't break the bank as there's only $1.5 million in guaranteed money. The rest of it he has to earn, and it's certainly possible that he will. It does have those incentives that take it up to 8.75 over 2 years. Now, if he plays well and solidifies a spot as a backup or spot starter or whatever, then in some ways that contract could still end up to be a bargain. But it does sound like they had a chance to have a better one. To be fair, I'm not sure why they didn't do this, but what I do know is that it worked out well for Heinicke. I know some of you asked for an update on Sadiq Charles, who had knee surgery, of course, in the fall and played only 2 snaps this year. My understanding is that he's progressing well. He's on pace to return. He's on pace with his recovery. Not running yet after the knee surgery, but he is moving well from what I'm told. I don't know that he'll be on the field in OTAs. I'm not even sure anyone will be on the field this spring. That remains to be seen. It's possible Charles could be ready then, but then it depends on how much he'd be helped by continuing to rehab rather than just working on the field. A lot of times they're going to take, with guys who have had the surgery, they're going to be very cautious with them in the spring and not rush anything, because when they really need them is in the summer, of course. But he certainly is expected to be there this summer. As I've said before, they like him at both tackle and guard. I don't think they've communicated to him how they see him down the road. So what it tells me is that he gives them some flexibility to find another lineman this offseason and use Charles accordingly wherever he ends up to be needed. Last thing, the more I talk to people about Chase Young, the more impactful I realize he was this season, not just on the field, but all over. For example, I know there were some coaches who wanted to see more from Montez Sweat during his rookie season in terms of the approach he took and all that. I think it sounds like he was kind of weighed down by the culture in the locker room, the coaching changes, all the stuff going on. It affected various aspects of his game or his work. Young is a natural upbeat person who basically pulled Sweat up to his level in terms of the approach, how he works away from the field, how he stays attentive in meetings. It's a good example of somebody who is willing to pull others up and somebody who was willing to be led and wanted to be led, because if Sweat didn't want to be led or at least pulled up, then he would have bucked it from the start. That's not what happened. I think he stayed after Sweat in a good way, and it's one reason why Sweat had the kind of year he did. A lot of credit to Sweat for what he did. Of course, he was able to build on his game. He started getting a little bit better at the end of his rookie year, so I don't know that all that was going on. I don't know, but that was some of the thoughts behind the scenes. But I do think it also speaks to why Young was such an important pick for this franchise, not just for what he did on the field, but for the way he can lift others around him and bring them up. That's how you start to build culture. Well, that's it from me. After this break, I'll be back with ESPN's Jeremy Fowler. Which wide receiver did he predict will come here in free agency? Welcome back. Now here's my conversation with ESPN's Jeremy Fowler. Well, Jeremy, before I get started, a week or two ago, you were kind of introduced to the Terry McLaurin fan club on social media and just how popular this guy is with fans. And you a little bit surprised at just his popularity, given unless you basically say he's one of the best, people seem to take a little bit of offense to that.
That's funny. Yeah, I was doing some free agency preview work, and I pegged Allen Robinson to the Washington Football Club because I do think they're going to be pretty aggressive and trying to upgrade some parts of the offense. And I had mentioned that Terry McLaurin is terrific, but some around the league view him as sort of a high-level number two. And so a lot of people took offense to that. I heard that on my phone. I got some texts about it. And it was all in good fun. I think he certainly has the potential to be a number one. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Stephon Diggs as far as how he plays, and just his build and like the ceiling for him.
Right.
But just talking to some people around the league when they rank like the top 10 guys, he's typically not on there yet, even though he had a great year. So, but it could be a matter of time, but yeah, I heard a little bit about that.
And it is funny because very soon he could be a top, and I think that's what people have to understand is who are the 10 and does he fit in there yet? It's a hard place to get to. It's kind of like saying quarterback's elite, and then when you do the rankings, maybe that elite guy you think is elite is number 8 on the list. Well, you don't have 8 elite quarterbacks in the NFL. So, but it is funny because I know you hit yesterday there was something. It was Chad Johnson was talking about how nasty McLaurin was and how some of those guys really like him and they like his game. And, he is a guy who is still ascending and will. And a big part of that is getting another quarterback in here.
Yeah.
And so that leads me to, and I'm going to get back to Allen Robinson in a minute and even like Juju and those guys. But with this quarterback carousel, we had to do something on ESPN, and you had, and I think the same as me, Sam Darnold is the guy you thought would be their starter week 1. Do you still think that? You still think that they end up trading him?
That's an interesting situation because I think the Jets are taking a step back. They're not wholly committing to selling Darnold. They're looking at it from a couple different angles. I know the coaching staff with the Jets has some intrigue in coaching Darnold. They believe that they can help him, they can get him better. And so that adds a wrinkle. And then I think the Jets, from what I've heard, asking around the league, they're willing to take their time here. They know they have time. They got to figure out what quarterbacks they could select in the draft, whether it's Zach Wilson or Justin Fields or Trey Lance. And so they want to get the full picture there and figure it all out. And so that makes it difficult. I know Washington is intrigued in quarterbacks like that where there's ability there. Maybe there's some untapped ability and the contract wouldn't break the bank. That's why I think they're at least one of the teams loosely involved in Marcus Mariota. I think teams are still talking to the Raiders. It wouldn't be surprised if Washington's done more than looked into that just because the contract would make some sense. And here's a guy who hasn't played much in the last year, but looked pretty good in that one game he played. And at least what you're getting for the most part. At the very least, it could be a 1-year stopgap that can help you win some games and be an upgrade.
And with Darnold, what else because and it's funny because I've talked to some people who are aren't very high on him. And I've talked to
Yeah.
some other coaches in the league who are like, that's the guy I would go get. What do you
Right.
hear about him?
Yeah, it's all over the map. I would say he's probably the most polarizing of them all.
Yeah.
I've talked to some coaches with teams that would be looking around, and they say he was awful last year. Like, it was really bad, just the accuracy and missing receivers. But others say, look, he's been in the worst situation the last 3 years than anybody, and so you almost have to erase some of that and start fresh with him and take his strengths and maximize them. That's why I think the Jets are at least intrigued by him with the new staff, because they feel like with the 49ers, Shanahan, Kubiak system, that can benefit him a great deal and sort of simplify things for him. You play to his strength and you go with it. So he, whereas Matthew Stafford, obviously you knew what you were getting in that trade market. Deshaun Watson, you would know. Even Jimmy Garoppolo, for the most part, you know what you're getting, where Darnold is still a complete mystery. So it takes the right coaching staff and coordinator. It takes a personnel and GM, where in this case, Martin Mayhew, let's say he had Sam Darnold ranked very high. We don't know exactly where he had him ranked yet, but that plays big into it. It takes somebody who believed in Darnold a great deal 3 years ago. I would say that, but there's more positive than negative in how teams look at him for the most part because of the raw ability.
And and he's only 23 years old too, which is kind of amazing to think about. So that's why you wonder like what the cost would be. And what do you think the cost would be to get a guy like that?
Well, I know our Adam Schefter has said maybe a late first. I don't know if Carson Wentz didn't merit a late first. I don't know that Sam Darnold is at this point. I think it's possible because of the upside. I think a day 2 pick. I think a second rounder would probably get it done. So the Jets, they'll say, hey, okay, look, if we stay at 2, do we have a quarterback we can win with? And if do we have a quarterback equal or better than Darnold? If it's at least equal, then they save all the money on a low rookie contract. So I think that's how they're looking at it. And they're out, but their problem is they're monitoring the Deshaun Watson situation too. Like if they get the green light, they'll jump into that one, but there's no guarantee Watson wants to go there. In fact, I think he'd prefer to go to some other places. So they have a lot to sort out. I think that's why they're waiting and not being rash. Where the Eagles, like, it was sort of broken with Carson Wentz. I think when they fired Doug Peterson, they were hopeful. But it just became clear he was unhappy there. Where Darnold, I think he still wants to stay there. So they have more to sort out than most teams.
It's kind of looking at Philly too. It's almost. I was texting with someone the other day. It's kind of remarkable because going into the season, you'd say this is a really good franchise and a stable franchise. They got this situation, they got that, and now you look at them and it feels like a mess. What's the perception of them around the league?
There's a lot of dissecting going around about some of the hidden issues there that were maybe known a little bit in some league circles, but it's almost like they had this foundation set on sand, and it just sort of caved on them. There's a lot of finger pointing. There's just a wonder how Howie Roseman has survived all this, and where others haven't. Where Doug Peterson went to 3 straight playoffs and a Super Bowl and still loses his job. There's just so much. These are just questions that are being asked of what the heck is going on there, and it's really remarkable to even try to figure it out. I think part of it is just they held on to a Super Bowl roster a year or two too long, and you couple that with a quarterback that was clearly shaken by the drafting of Jalen Hurts. And I think that's partly why he's out now is still, I think that Jalen Hurts issue for him loomed large. He's like, I just got past this Nick Foles stuff.
Right.
Nick Foles is the hero. I got us to the playoffs last year, and then you draft a quarterback in the second round. It was already fragile emotionally for Wentz, and then you bring in him. And so, from what I was hearing when they fired Peterson, I thought like the chances increased greatly that Wentz would stay. But then just the Hurts thing he couldn't overcome too. So it just became clear. It also comes down to football, right? Like they had a ton of offensive line injuries. They aged at several positions they shouldn't have. Probably should have drafted Justin Jefferson when they didn't. Like this receiver was a major issue. So it was just a roster that caught fire 3 years ago that wasn't as good as everybody thought. And so that fell apart, and that makes everybody look bad.
How does Washington, how much have they changed their perception? And do people buy into where they feel like they might be headed?
You look at what they ended 5-2. at the end of the season. Lost a lot of games with Haskins in place. So now that Haskins obviously is not the long-term issue, you look at the body of work and what they had to work with. This is a pretty good team. I think that they gained a lot of respect in Ron Rivera's first year, and I think that's why you'll see them be at least mildly aggressive in the next month, because they feel like probably a few pieces away from contention. Honestly, well, but it's funny though. You look at their roster. And we've talked about this. It's still a lot of either low budget veteran deals or rookie deals. Like there's still some upgrades there that have to be made, especially on defense, and which is a good thing. I think, there weren't a lot of obvious like cap casualties when I was looking at the roster, which is a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because you're not really cash strapped, but and it's a bad thing because you maybe need more established players. And they're going to have to pay Jonathan Allen at some point. But you have a foundation with good line play, assuming you keep Brandon Scherf, which I think they absolutely need to do. He just with an offense that isn't loaded, it's hard to get rid of your best offensive lineman. It's a bad time to do that if you want to keep building. So, but they're built strong in the right places. They need to add another playmaker or two. Need to solve the quarterback spot. More depth at, say, linebacker, secondary. I think they'll be pretty good.
And I think you're right on all of that. And that, I also wonder, like, as the perception as an organization, is it too soon? Because I get this all the time, like by fans, can they believe now that this is the right direction? What point my thing has always been, let's see how they go this year to see how they build off it. Because we've all had, seen the ball get pulled away from fans here in the past. But as far as an organization, do you feel like there's, what did they prove maybe in the last year with Rivera and where this is going, aside from just the roster and on-field stuff? Have they done anything different as an organization to show that maybe this is different?
I think Rivera's presence helps. As a guy that's been to a Super Bowl, comes in, seems to command the locker room and the room in a good way. And then, Martin Mayhew, you bring him in, guy who's got a lot of credentials and is well respected around the league. Marty Herney as a talent evaluator is very well respected. So you have a clear cut chain of command that you can lean on. And so Ron has the respectability. He's going to be making, I assume, a lot of the final calls, but where things are going. There's a 3-man process. Those 3 guys are going to make the decisions, I assume. And so I think you can take solace in that, coupled with a lot of the young talent you have. That's exciting. You've hit on some draft picks. Now you got to work around those guys and provide them with more talent. But the ownership issue is always going to loom large. I mean, you hear the stories. You saw what Jay Gruden said the other day, I think, about the Dwayne Haskins pick and Dan just walking in the room, and like stuff like that is always a wild card that can, if that's going to sabotage your upcoming draft, that's always going to take away from the bottom line of fandom a little bit. So that's always going to loom large. But if you're looking for more stability than you've had, I think you do have it with the current regime.
And with Sheriff, and the tag stuff comes out today. You can start tagging people. Do you think they'll be able to get a deal done without tagging him again? Because he's in a good spot where if he just says, "Well, I don't want to sign," they can tag me. I can make $18 million. Right. But yet, I do believe you got to find a way to sign him because he is really good at what he does, and they value interior line play. What do you think happens there?
Yeah, it's complicated, right? Because he's got the injury history. Right. But they tagged him anyways, and he performed pretty well when he was in there. So it's like, it's tough. Do you want to go $18 million a year for a guard? Probably not. But knowing Scherf's situation, I'm assuming that's going to be his benchmark, because that's what a good negotiation would demand, right? Because it's the 120% of the $15 million. You're not going to want to take less than that. But if you want to make it work, you can structure it in such a way that gives him some cap relief in the first few years, gives him the guaranteed money that he needs. I think you can do it. That's the question is, I think the issue is, do you tag him again to buy yourself some time? But here's the issue with that. The Colts could do Quentin Nelson, and that's going to be a huge deal. Right. And then the Bengals are desperate for offensive line help. Do they go throw $18 million a year at Joe Thuney? Then you're looking at even more. So true. It's the cost analysis of, do you just try to knock it out now versus do you wait? I think, I think they'll end up being at least mildly aggressive here, to at least try. And it wouldn't shock either way, though, because it is a big number. But he's a top 3 guard right now. Zach Martin's been hurt. Brandon Brooks has been hurt. If you have a top 2 to 3 player to position, it's hard to let that go.
I heard this with Jonathan Allen too, where it's like, well, he's a guy who's respected in the organization. He's a guy who's done what you've asked him to do and worked a certain way. If you don't sign him, what does it send? What message does it send to the other players in the locker room? So I think Sheriff would be one of those guys as well. You brought up Allen Robinson too. Do you think that the Bears end up tagging him, or do you think he does get to free agency?
I think it depends on what happens in the next week or two if they have a clear picture of their quarterback. I mean, I think they're scrambling there in Chicago every day to figure out what they can do at the quarterback position and how they can get a clear picture here. So whether it's like a Mariota or whether they're going to rely on a draft pick, but they're sort of stuck in the middle. They don't have any depth at receiver, so they need Allen Robinson. But I think Allen Robinson is looking to get out. I think he would prefer not to be tagged. I think he knows right now he can get a big deal somewhere. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think he'll be overly happy if he gets tagged. And I think he could not sign it and drag this out, honestly. Because it hasn't gone well there. The negotiations didn't go well a year before. So I don't think he's going to feel like they're going to negotiate in earnest with him over the next 4 months if he is tagged. So I could see, they need some cap relief too.
Right.
So I could see them moving on and then going to sign a guy, whether it's like a Corey Davis or one, somebody maybe in that second tier receiver market where you feel like you can get a little better value. I don't know. I saw some are paying the Chicago is needing to tag him and they do need to, and it could help, but I don't know. That one's interesting. I feel like both sides want a clean break.
And then for you, just pegging, because you did, and for people listening, Jeremy did a top 50 free agents breakdown. Was it a few weeks ago, correct? Mm-hmm. That's on ESPN Plus, a really good thorough breakdown, not only of the top 50 free agents, but your prediction for where they end up. And you did have Robinson to Washington. I mean, I would assume his services are going to be highly sought after by a lot of teams. Why did you feel that Washington why did you predict him for Washington?
Well, I just go back to them wanting Amari Cooper last year.
Right.
They're obviously willing to spend on that position. They feel like they're a piece or two away. They have between Terry McLaurin and Logan Thomas and those guys, they have some intriguing pieces, but I think they need at least one more. And so why not put it over the top? They've got some money to spend. They're in a better situation than at least half the league from a salary cap standpoint. And then depending on what you do with Alex Smith, you could create a lot more. And so, I think especially if you're going to switch out the quarterback position and get somebody new in there via trade or free agency, you're going to need the weapons. And so, this is a team that got a taste of playoff help, and they're going to want to capitalize on it, So I just think they're one of the teams that are going to be willing to look at this pretty heavily. And I do think teams will take one of two schools of thought with like the lower salary cap. They'll either say, we're going to do a bunch of 1-year deals,
right,
at a high number, or they're going to think they're getting a little bit of a discount. And so, they'll spend pretty big thinking, hey, when the cap grows and flattens out a couple of years from now, we will have gotten a 15 to 20% discount. I don't know if Allen Robinson's going to take that, but the point is you can structure it in such a way where maybe you can actually help yourself a little bit if you're aggressive.
Another guy well, because you were in Pittsburgh for at least you covered Juju Schuster for at least a year, right?
Yeah.
So
years, yep.
Yeah. So he's going to be a free agent too, and Pittsburgh's not going to franchise him. So what do you think happens with him, and what would a team be getting in a Juju Schuster?
So yeah, he's going to have a fascinating market because he's not a burner, but he gets yards after the catch.
Right.
He didn't put up numbers of a true number one, but he's shown a ton of toughness. He's shown he can make the big play. He's a terrific blocker. He can do all the little things you want in an offense. If you want to run like that 49ers type system with him, you can. Or if you just want to line him out wide, he can do that. But if you want a traditional tough slot that's going to get those yards up the middle, he can do that. So I think if you're a team looking for like kind of a culture shift on the field with some toughness and kind of that Pittsburgh swag,
right,
for lack of a better term, then he'd be a good guy for that. And so that's why I think, he's not going to have like the $20 million market, but I think 16 a year is probably reasonable for him. I think he might be able to pull that off, especially with, like if you're a team like the Raiders or somebody that already likes him and you're willing to spend a little bit, could get interesting.
Just a couple more things here, Jeremy. Thank you for your generous time here. Curtis Samuel is another one who is going to be, and now you had him going to Jacksonville because of the Urban connection. Obviously, this group has a connection to him as well. What do you think? Where again, these are all just projections, but his contract value compared to a Juju or an Allen, what do you think it would be?
Yeah, he's tough. He's interesting because he can make big plays and he's fast. And I know the reason why I picked him to Urban Meyer is because I remember even talking to him about this back in the day when he was coming out of Ohio State. He looked at him as like his Percy Harvin, like just that sort of next level playmaker that sees the game at a different level. And I don't know if Samuel ever got to that level. Harvin didn't have huge NFL stats, but he was just a legend for how good he either was or could have been at any given moment. Just a really smart football player with great speed. And so Samuel's kind of a 2.0 of that, maybe not at that level just yet. I know some coaches I've talked to kind of criticize his route running. They say he's really more of almost like more of a running back who can, line up in the slot or line up out wide and get you some easy yards if you scheme him open. But he's not like, he's not going to be an Allen Robinson as far as like a pure route runner breaking it down. And so I think that hurts his market a little bit, but it's going to be pretty strong because of the way offenses value yards after the catch and just raw playmaking and creativity. So obviously with Carolina in this connection, that would fit well. But like you got Antonio Gibson and guys like that you can already do that with. I don't know. And to me, maybe Samuel's a little redundant there.
It depends on how they would see him because they could almost use him as the reverse of an Antonio Gibson, mostly as a receiver, some as a running back. And it's funny because he made a huge play against this team last year. And you talk about the route running, and he actually ran a kind of a poor route. It was like a post, but he fakes to the corner and the safety doesn't bite. And it was a bad fake. And yet he was wide open because of his speed. It's just like it topped anything else he had to do. It was all about speed. And, he at least held the safety enough. He didn't fool him, but he held them enough to get open like that. But that's what he can do. And so we'll see. The last
Those
one.
Guys get paid, man. I mean,
and I, but I could see him using him almost as like in relation to Gibson as the receiver version of Antonio Gibson, who can go to the backfield on occasion. With these free agent quarterbacks, are there any there that you say this guy might be intriguing for Washington? Whether I know Cam obviously has ties, and they didn't get him last year, but he still has the ties. And I think part of the reason last year was because of the presence of Dwayne Haskins. But Cam didn't look great this year. So what do you think happens with any of those free agent quarterbacks? Who might be one that you'd say this is worth watching?
Well, I was about to pull up a list here. Let's see. So I don't see, I think New Orleans will keep Jameis. They've already sort of expressed that to him. I mean, do you go like a Ryan Fitzpatrick route? I don't know. I don't know if I see that. I think I don't know. Mariota, I've heard it from a couple different people around the league, and I know it's sort of been like bantered about online. I do think Washington's at least intrigued by him.
Yeah, I agree.
If it's a fourth rounder or something reasonable, like why not, right? Doesn't really hurt you.
No, I think that's the one to watch too. Yeah, I agree.
And it's not very exciting, to be honest. But if you feel like, maybe he just wasn't healthy at the end in Tennessee and, he had that game where he came in for Derek Carr and looked great, maybe there's something there. And you can still draft a guy or play around with that, but I don't know. I'm looking at the list here. I'm still not. Everybody says, look, Dak's going to get the second tag and all that, right? It's $38 million. Like, I'm still not convinced that they're going to do that. Like, until it's on paper, I don't know. That's a massive number for a guy who was hurt, who's a great player, but I don't know. I still think that's one to watch. We'll see.
Yeah.
They're saying all the right things, but it's been 2 years and you haven't paid him yet. So it's like, do you bring in like a Joe Flacco or an Andy Dalton for just a year or Ryan Fitzpatrick? I don't know if that solves things for you. Maybe
it'll only allows you to keep building while and serving as a placeholder and then maybe going out next year and trying again. That, you know what I mean? Like it allows you to not overspend to get a guy, draft some more, get some free agents in here, get a better roster, and then maybe attack it next year. But it's hard. It's hard to get that guy and it's a never-ending quest. So,
but see, like Alex, that's the thing, right? Alex Smith can do that.
Yeah,
but I don't think he can hold up for 16 games. So,
and they don't want that at $24.4 million on the cap either. So that's the other.
It's tough.
That's the other one. So yeah, we'll see. But anyways, Jeremy, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate the time and great insight. And thank you very much, man.
Yeah, for sure, John. Keep up the great work, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you. That's it for this episode. Thanks to Jeremy for joining me, and thank you, as always, for listening. It's always appreciated. I'll be back with another episode later this week, talking to former Washington player Chris Baker. Swaggy. Talk to you next time.